My son had never once asked to leave early from a baseball game. Not in 11 years. He loved everything about it, the smell of the popcorn, the crack of the bat echoing off the aluminum bleachers, the way he'd stand up on the bench to see over the adults in front of him. So when he tugged on my sleeve in the 4th inning and said, quietly, almost like he didn't want anyone else to hear, "Dad, can we just go? Please." Something shifted in my chest. I looked down at him. He was staring at his shoes. I asked if he felt sick. He shook his head. I asked if something happened. He shook his head again. But his jaw was tight in a way I'd only seen once before, when his grandfather died and he was trying very hard not to cry at the funeral. I didn't push. I just said okay, grabbed his jacket off the bleacher, and walked him to the truck. We drove about 3 blocks before he spoke. "Dad." He said it like it weighed something. "I'm here, but." He didn't say anything else for another minute. Then he pulled up his left sleeve, slowly, carefully, like it hurt, and turned his forearm toward me. I was at a red light. I looked over. There were 4 distinct bruises on the inside of his forearm, each one roughly the size of a thumb, arranged almost perfectly in a row. I remember the light turning green. I remember the not moving. I remember the car behind me honking. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned off the engine. I kept my voice as level as I could. I asked him who did that. He looked out the passenger window for a long time. Then he said, "Coach Briggs." I want to be very clear about what happened inside me in that moment, because people always imagine it as rage, and I understand why. I've imagined it that way myself when I used to hear stories like this about other people's kids. But what I actually felt was something colder than rage, something that made me think very carefully and very slowly, because my son was sitting right next to me watching my face, waiting to see if I was going to blow up or fall apart. I did neither. I put my hand on the back of his neck, just rested it there, and I said, "You did the right thing telling me. I'm going to take care of this, you understand? That is my job." He started crying then, silently the way boys who've learned to hold it in tend to cry. Coach Briggs was the varsity football coach at Lakewood Middle School. He'd been there for 9 years. He ran the summer conditioning program my son had joined back in August, a voluntary thing for kids who wanted to try out for the team in the fall. My son was 11, small for his age, and had been working hard all summer specifically because he wanted to make that team. I'd driven him to morning sessions 3 times a week since June. Briggs was one of those coaches who had a reputation, the good kind, unfortunately. Parents talked about him like he was building character, turning soft kids into tough ones. He had regional championship trophies in a case by the gym doors. He was 38 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and every adult in that school seemed to think the sun rose and set on his conditioning program. On the drive to the hospital, because I was taking my son directly to the hospital, I wasn't doing anything else first. I asked him to tell me what he could, just what he felt comfortable saying. The story came out in pieces. It had started about 3 weeks earlier. My son had fumbled a blocking drill and Briggs had grabbed him by the forearm and squeezed while he corrected him, hard enough to leave a mark. My son hadn't said anything because he thought it was a one-time thing, thought maybe he deserved it somehow for messing up. But it had happened again, and again after that. Always during drills. Always when my son made a mistake. Always the same grip, same forearm. Always hard enough to bruise. My son had been wearing long sleeves for 3 weeks. In August. In Georgia. I had not noticed. I'm going to sit with that for a second because I think it matters. I am a present father. I'm at every game, every practice, every school event I can manage. I work construction, I work long days, and I still find the time. And my son managed to hide 4 separate incidents from me across 3 weeks because he was 11 years old. He wanted to make the team, and his coach had told him. Told all the boys, apparently, that anything that happened in conditioning stayed in conditioning, that talking about it was a sign of weakness, that boys who ran home to their parents didn't make rosters. We got to the ER at Grady at around 8:30 that night. The nurse who checked us in was calm and thorough. A pediatric doctor came in, examined my son's arm, took photographs, and asked him a series of questions while I stood by the door. My son answered everything clearly, The doctor told me the bruising was consistent with forceful grip pressure and recommended I file a police report. I asked her to write that down. She wrote it down. We filed the report that same night at the precinct on Memorial Drive. The officer who took our statement was polite and said all the right things. He also told me, in a tone that was trying to manage my expectations, that without corroboration from other students, cases like this were difficult. I thanked him. I wrote down his badge number. Here is what I did over the next 9 days. First, I called the school district's main line the next morning and reported the incident formally. I was told someone would follow up. That follow-up took 4 days and consisted of a 2-minute phone call from an assistant to someone in the district office who told me the matter had been referred to the principal, a man named, and I want to be precise here, Vice Principal Harmon, because the principal herself was out for a family matter. Harmon told me in a second call that they were looking into it and that Briggs had been a valued member of the staff for nearly a decade. Valued member of the staff. He said it like that was supposed to reassure me. Second, I called the parents of every boy I knew was in that conditioning program. I had a list from the sign-up sheet I'd photographed back in June on registration day. Just habit, I photograph everything. Something I picked up from years of working job sites where paperwork goes missing. I had 17 names. I reached 11 families. 3 of them told me immediately that their sons had come home with marks. One father, a man named Russell who worked nights at a distribution center and had a boy 2 years older than mine, started crying on the phone. He said his son had told him the same thing mine told me, that Briggs had said what happened in conditioning stayed there. Russell had confronted Briggs directly 3 weeks before my son's incident. Briggs had denied it and the school had done nothing. Russell had let it drop because his son begged him to, because the boy was afraid of losing his spot on the roster. 4th family I reached. A woman named Gwen, raising her son alone since her husband had been deployed. Said her boy had marks on his upper arm she'd assumed were from rough play. He was 13. She hadn't pushed him on it. When she showed him my message describing what had happened to my son, he told her everything. By day 5, I had 4 boys whose parents were willing to go on record. 4 sets of photographs, 2 police reports filed, 1 new, and I had something else, a post on a local youth sports parent forum from 14 months ago, buried about 6 pages back in a thread about middle school athletics, from a parent who'd written that their son had quit Briggs's program after 1 week because he came home marked up, and the school had brushed it off when they complained. That post had 2 replies, both from other parents saying they'd had similar concerns. None of them had pushed it further. I printed that thread. I printed all 43 pages of it. I called a friend of mine, a guy I went to high school with who now works as a paralegal at a firm downtown. I'm not a lawyer. I want to be clear about that. I did not have a lawyer. What I had was a friend who knew how to organize documents and who stayed up until midnight with me 2 nights in a row helping me put together a binder. Incident reports, medical photographs, parent statements, the forum thread, a timeline, every communication I'd had with the school district printed and dated. The school board meeting was on a Tuesday. It was open to the public, as they all are, but they're usually sparsely attended. Mostly retired people and 1 or 2 parents with specific grievances about bus schedules or cafeteria menus. I knew because I'd attended one 3 years ago when they were talking about cutting the after-school program my son was in. This one was different. I had asked the 4 families if they would come. They all said yes. Russell drove 40 minutes from the other side of town. Gwen brought her son, which I had not expected and which I think mattered more than anything else that happened that night. I had also, 5 days before the meeting, sent a message to a woman named Dolores who ran the Facebook group for Lakewood Middle School parents. I didn't post publicly. I messaged her privately and told her what I had. I asked her to let parents know there was a matter being brought before the school board that directly affected student safety. I didn't name Briggs. I didn't have to. Dolores apparently made some calls of her own. There were close to 90 people in that room when the meeting started. The board chair, a woman named Mrs. Atkins, visibly recalibrated when she saw the turnout. She opened the meeting as usual. When they reached public comment, I went to the microphone first. I spoke for 7 minutes. I had timed it in my kitchen twice the night before. I did not raise my voice. I did not use emotional language. I presented the documentation the way my paralegal friend had taught me, chronologically, with specific dates, specific incident numbers, specific names of district staff I had contacted and the responses I'd received. I referenced the forum thread. I referenced the prior parent who had complained 14 months ago and been ignored. I said, I am asking this board tonight, on the record, what procedures exist to ensure that a formal complaint about staff misconduct results in action rather than deflection, and why those procedures were not applied when the first complaint was filed over a year ago. Then I stepped back and let Russell walk to the microphone. Then Gwen's son, who was 13 years old and stood at that microphone and told a room of 90 people and a 5-member school board exactly what had happened to him. In his own words, without notes. You could have heard a pin drop. The board chair called a recess after his statement. They were gone for 22 minutes. When they came back, Mrs. Adkins announced that Coach Briggs had been placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation. She said the district would be retaining an outside party to conduct the review. She said the board would be scheduling a follow-up meeting to address procedural gaps in the handling of prior complaints. She did not look at Harmon, who was sitting in the third row, when she said that last part. The investigation took 6 weeks. I won't detail all of it because some of it involves the other families, and their privacy isn't mine to give away. What I can tell you is that by the end of it, 2 additional boys had come forward who had not been part of the original group, that the outside investigators' report confirmed a pattern of behavior going back at least 2 years. That Briggs was terminated. That the district settled with 3 of the families, including Russell's, outside of court. Harmon resigned in March. My son made a different team the following spring, a rec league. No tryouts, no conditioning program, just kids who wanted to play ball on Saturday mornings. He plays shortstop. He's got a good arm for a kid his size. What stays with me, what I think about when I can't sleep, which is more often than I'd like, is not Briggs. What stays with me is those 3 weeks. 3 weeks of long sleeves in August. 3 weeks of my son getting in my truck after practice and saying practice was fine when I asked how it went. He wanted to make that team so badly. He was willing to absorb what was happening to him rather than risk losing the shot. That's not weakness. That is an 11-year-old boy who has been told by an adult in authority that silence is the price of belonging. After everything was finished, after the board's investigation closed and the school year settled back into something that felt normal, I sat down with my son one evening. We were on the back porch. He had a glass of orange juice. I had a beer I wasn't really drinking. I told him I needed him to understand something. I said, there is no team, no roster, no coach, no title, no trophy. There is nothing on this earth that is worth you staying quiet when someone is hurting you. You come to me. You come to me first, before anything else. That is what I am here for. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I thought you'd pull me from the program and I wouldn't make the team. I said, I know. He said, and you would have, right? You would have pulled me. I said, in about 4 seconds flat. He almost smiled. Then he looked out at the yard and said, I should have told you sooner. I said, yeah, but you told me when you could, and I was there. That's all I knew how to do. Show up, pay attention, and be someone he could walk to when he finally found the words. I don't know if I did everything right. I know I did not yell at anyone, though I wanted to. I know I did not confront Briggs myself, though I thought about it every single day. I know I built a case the way you build anything that has to hold weight, piece by piece, carefully, so it doesn't fall apart when you need it most. The trophies are still in the case by the gym doors at Lakewood. I don't know if they'll take them down. Maybe they will eventually, maybe they won't. Those are just objects. What matters is that 9 families know their boys were believed, that a room full of 90 people showed up on a Tuesday night and made it impossible to look away. That a 13-year-old kid stood at a microphone and said the true thing out loud, and the people in power had to sit there and listen. That's the part I want my son to remember. Not the bruises, not the long sleeves, not the weeks I didn't know. I want him to remember the Tuesday night, the full room, and what happens when people decide not to stay quiet. I think about those 3 weeks a lot. 3 weeks of long sleeves in August. 3 weeks of my son climbing into my truck after practice and saying it was fine when I asked how it went. He wasn't lying to protect Briggs. He was lying to protect himself, or what he thought he needed. A spot on a roster, a coach's approval, the feeling of belonging to something. That's the part that keeps me up at night, and I think it's worth saying plainly. What happened to my son didn't start with the bruises. It started with a man who understood exactly how to make an 11-year-old boy stay quiet. He didn't threaten him with punishment. He threatened him with exclusion. He told those boys that silence was strength, and that speaking up was weakness. That is not an accident. That is a calculation. And it worked for however long it worked, because my son, like most kids that age, wanted to be seen as someone who could handle things. Here is what I've come to understand about that. There is a version of toughness that is actually just fear wearing a different coat. Real toughness. The kind worth building in a kid isn't about absorbing pain without telling anyone. It's about having the moral clarity to know when something is wrong, and the courage to say so even when you stand to lose something by saying it. My son found that courage eventually in a parking lot in the 4th inning of a game he loved. It took him 3 weeks, and it cost him something to get there. But he got there. What I did in the 9 days after, the calls, the binder, the Tuesday night meeting, none of that came from some special skill I have. It came from slowing down when everything in me wanted to speed up. Rage is fast. Evidence is slow. I had to choose slow, deliberately, every single day, because my son was watching me, and because I wanted whatever we built to actually hold. Russell drove 40 minutes on a work night because his boy deserved better than what the system had already given him. Gwen showed up because she'd been carrying something she hadn't known how to name until someone else named it first. And Gwen's son stood at that microphone at 13 years old and said the true thing in front of 90 people. And I think about that kid whenever I feel like something is too hard to face. He didn't have a binder. He didn't have a bindery little friend or a timeline or documentation. He just had what happened to him and he said it out loud. That's the thing about doing right by people. It tends to compound. One family calls another. One boy's story makes another boy's story possible. One Tuesday night meeting changes what the next family can expect when they walk into a school district office and say, "My child was hurt here." I don't know what my son will remember about this when he's grown. Maybe the bruises. Maybe the binder. Maybe just that I showed up, kept my voice even, and didn't let it go. But I hope what sticks, somewhere underneath all of it, is this. The truth told carefully, backed by patience and documentation and other people willing to stand beside you, is more powerful than anything that tried to bury it. I watched that be true in a fluorescent-lit school board room on a Tuesday night in Georgia. I watched 90 people make it impossible to look away. That's the only legacy worth leaving. Not the trophy in the case by the gym doors. What you did when it cost you something to do it.